quite unfortunately, but Russia is always giving more and more reasons for it to be sanctioned. Wait a sec, we have people dying every day, and you just have to show more actions, more decisive actions. We've been also thinking about more comprehensive trade bans against Russia, which would just ban, let's say, any items of certain codes completely, including the microelectronics. The problem with sanctioning the propagandists is the freedom of speech. This is not enough. This is yet not enough. We have to do more.
As a victim of aggression, Ukraine is most interested in neutralizing Russia's ability to wage war and continue the aggression. Therefore, the Ukrainian sanctions lists must be the most stringent. In my opinion, they should form the basis for the sanctions decisions made by our partners. What should Ukraine do to sanction Russia better and to receive this mirrored support from international partners?
Well, I would say that the quantity and quality of sanctions against Russia implemented in Ukraine is the highest. We've sanctioned, I guess, almost 9,000 of individuals and entities of Russia here in Ukraine by sanctions. And this would be a display of very much of trust and support if the partners would synchronize all of the sanctions, which they will not, but anyway, we are pushing. We would always synchronize the sanctions implemented by other countries against Russia on our level. But at the same time, we've been pushing quite hard with on the partners to implement new ideas on sanctions, and you probably heard that President Zelensky himself advocated for the Rosatom sanctions, for the diamond sanctions, and Andriy Yermak is always advocating for some more sanction measures to be adopted, especially the propagandists on the Rosatom. Mr. Kuleba is also always supporting more and more sanctions. And we think that, quite unfortunately, but we do have occasionally new, let's say, reasons to advocate for more sanctions. So if it is like Kakhovka Dam, so that would be just another display of Russian attitude towards the civilized world, which would again mean for us the need to urge the countries to act more decisively and implement more sanctions. So quite unfortunately, but Russia is always giving more and more reasons for it to be sanctioned. The most recent attack, when the Lviv was hit with another cruise missiles, the calibers, again, there is still a lot to be done about making it not possible for Russia to receive more Western-made microelectronics to enable it making more missiles. But still, a lot can be done in this area too. So we would keep pushing.
Continuing this topic, a couple of days ago, there was a report titled Russia's Military Capacity and the Role of Imported Components. Yeah. You were one of the authors of this report, and it presents several conclusions. Firstly, international sanctions are indeed limiting Russia's ability to produce key weapon systems. Yeah. But on the other hand, Western components are still finding their way to Russian weapons. Yeah. So, can you name the countries and the components?
Well, again, there is no great secret in that just in the cruise missiles produced in Russia, those are 5 models, there is at least 200 Western-made microelectronics parts, and 80% of those are manufactured by the US companies, mostly the microchips. So yes, I think that this is not an easy effort to be taken to stop all that. Microchips are really small. The supply chain of the microchips can be different. we totally agree with the point that it is not always the freshly made part that can be just stockpiled for years. But on the other hand, wait a sec, we have people dying every day, and you just have to show more actions, more decisive actions. And
like what? Like what actions do you expect?
Tighten the export controls, introduce the end-user certificates, more aggressive outreach to the third countries which are re-exporting those parts to Russia. We've been also thinking about more comprehensive trade bans against Russia, which would just ban, let's say, any items of certain codes completely, including the microelectronics. The 11th sanctions package from the EU, it has now a tool which allows EU to implement sanctions against third countries or companies of the third countries, which is quite unprecedented for the very idea of the EU sanctions, making effective the extraterritorial sanctions to be applied. But again, so please do act decisively. I totally praise the efforts, the diplomatic efforts, the top officials of the EU and the UK been doing since April, I guess. So I think that in June, in July, we would see a little bit different picture about the trade rates and re-export rates to the third countries. But this is not enough. This is yet not enough. We have to do more.
Kyiv also works as a platform through which foreign media outlets and thought leaders can communicate their question to our guests. So I have a question for you from The Guardian. Were you worried about some of the cases in the European Court in which Russian oligarchs are asking for relief from sanctions?
Yeah, well, you just have to realize that Russia itself and the Russian oligarchs would always leverage on all the values from the Western world. So if it is a value about justice or value about the ability to protect yourself in a court, they would always have the best use of it. So this is what they've been doing. If you go to Russia, you have no free courts in there. You just would be very difficult for you to find any justice in Russia. So this is about the values, and you just have to realize that those guys are abusing these values in EU, in some other countries. So I think I've read the recently interview of Mr. Friedman, which is heavily sanctioned in almost every jurisdiction, and he is kind of sanctioned for good, and he's just mourning that sanctions made his life kind of difficult or destroyed his lifestyle. I would respond very easily to that come on, I think that this is not the sanctions. Sanctions were made for a purpose. Sanctions were made against you for the actions you did. So, Mr. Friedman, if you've been working for Putin, if you've been supporting Putin's regime, if you've been effectively supporting the aggression against Ukraine, this what destroyed your life, not the sanctions. So this is kind of manipulation, I would say.
Austrian disinformation analyst Dietmar Pichler asks, given that we are aware of numerous actors globally disseminating Russian propaganda and disinformation regarding the aggression against Ukraine even prior to 2022, are there any intentions to introduce a more extensive sanction regime targeting such individuals?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like this question. The international group of experts been suggesting more tight sanctions against the propagandists since September last year, and we suggested a list of those Russian propagandists to be sanctioned, and we've been always pushing for them to be sanctioned, and we are yet struggling. I think that there was kind of small progress in some selected jurisdictions about sanctioning some of the propagandists, but on the high level, well, a lot of them can, like on Monday, they would receive some state praises from Putin, and on Tuesday he would go, maybe Kirkorov or somebody else, he would go to Paris and praise the Western lifestyle. So this is a little bit farcical to tell about the, well, again, the problem with sanctioning the propaganda is the freedom of speech. I think that our partners are yet underestimating the Russian media. They just thinking that in Russia there is freedom of speech, which they don't have. So, and quite mistakenly, the West and the Westerns are trying to apply the values of the West about freedom of speech to the propagandists from Russia. This is kind of wrong attitude. I think that this is much easier and this is more correct would be to sanction all those propagandists we suggest, and there are good reasons for them to be sanctioned. And yet again, sanctions is not a punishment. Sanctions is just a reason to change the attitude, to change the behavior, a push. So if it is Kirkorov with a nice real estate in Florida, and if finally the US applies some restrictive measures against Kirkorov, and he suddenly cannot come to the US to his beloved house and to make his concerts or make cameos at some festivals, that would probably make him think if he still wants to continue this public support of Putin and all those other ways of his propaganda. So this is about making them change.
Here I'm just guessing, but I dare say, what if Dietmar wants to know what to do with people like, for example, Tucker Carlson, not a Russian propagandist? Right. Do we have to do something with people like him?
Well, I mean, from the standpoint of Ukraine, of course, those are just the same propagandists which are helping Putin to continue his war efforts. But he is doing his job in the US.
Mm-hmm. And can we communicate this with our US counterparts?
Well, I think they understand that we don't like it. Okay. Yeah, this is quite obvious.
Let's talk a bit about Task Force UA. Right. So what are its functions and how do they differ from the ones, for example, of their interagency working group on the implementation of state sanctions policy?
Well, good question. So the Task Force UA is an ad hoc gathering of different law enforcement agencies of Ukraine with the objective to trace, seize and confiscate the assets of certain Russian individuals with the twist that those assets must be the foreign assets. So the good examples of the target persons for the task force would be Mr. Deripaska or Mr. Shelko or Mr. Yevtushenko and some Ukrainians also like Boguslav and Zhevago. So all those groups been committing different economic crimes, and not just economic crimes but also state crimes, atrocity crimes against Ukraine for years. And they've got a lot of assets, not just within Ukrainian territory, but also abroad in selected European countries in the US. And Ukraine now has all the reasons to investigate their actions, their activities. So all of them have very active criminal cases ongoing. And we think that the objective of this task force effort, it would be exactly to find, seize and freeze the assets of those mentioned individuals abroad.
What is the most challenging stage in the confiscation process? The search, the argumentation for arrest, or actually proving the case after the confiscation?
Well, a lot of circumstances about confiscating the assets, both private assets and sovereign assets of Russia, is having a lot of legal challenges. But that I mean that the sanctions itself, it is an administrative measure which cannot easily lead to the confiscating of the assets, which is kind of more criminal measure. So this is why since the full-scale invasion, some selected or key partners started to implement the legislation allowing them to confiscate the assets, the private assets of certain individuals for certain doings. So this is why Canada introduced the legislation allowing them to confiscate some assets. This is why the US implemented the legislation, and they've started the process so they can now confiscate the individual assets for violating the sanctions. This is why there is a draft bill in the European Commission which would allow also confiscate for violating the sanctions. In Ukraine it is even more easy. In Ukraine we can actually confiscate the assets from the sanctioned individuals. But to get our chances to confiscate the assets of certain private individuals increased, we've also been looking at certain criminal patterns or certain criminal offenses committed by those individuals. So if it is money laundering, which is more or less the same crime in all the jurisdictions, and we think that within certain mentioned targets, the money laundering did take place. So the conviction for the commission of money laundering in Ukraine would potentially effectively lead us to all the legal grounds for confiscating of the assets abroad. So this is the most legal avenue we've been exploring within the task force UA.
I see. That's very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm done with my questions.
Right,
and you see how much of them I have.
Wow.
Vladislav, thank you very much for this conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to know more about sanctions.
Right.
Let's find better ways to harm Russia economically.
Yeah,
so good luck with that.
Thank you very much.
So I had a pleasure to talk with Vladyslav Vlasiuk. This was Tetiana Gaiduk in Kyiv, not Kiev. Stay safe, stay kind, stay with us, and see you soon.